AEGIS Wars, Prologue. The night was dark as sin. Distant stars could do little to substitute the light of the moon, which was but a sliver in the sky. Dusk had long since fallen upon a small village neighborhood. In a nondescript house, a young family slept like many of their ilk. With as silent a whisper as the wings of a powerful owl, an advanced aircraft alighted upon a grassy hill just to the east of the community. A man dressed in black crept through the night and stealthily infiltrated the aforementioned house. All was calm. So far, so good. He ignored the electronics, jewelry, and anything of apparent value. The objective was something far more significant. He quietly opened a door adorned with a poster of Spider-Man and entered the room. A little boy slumbered in his bed. The intruder removed a hypodermic needle from his bag and injected the contents into his target. The boy never stirred as his sleep went from peaceful and natural to a forced, dead-still mutinous. The man hoisted the motionless body over his shoulder and glided out into the cool night. Before he could reach his aircraft, the boy began to squirm. That was not right. The tranquilizer should have lasted for hours, not mere minutes. The kidnapper hurried toward the waiting vehicle, his speed impeded by the struggling child on his back. The aircraft began lifting off. His co-pilot must have been spooked, and in a moment he could see why. A modern fighter jet had appeared and was closing in fast. The captor knew he could not reach his retreating vehicle with the extra weight slowing him down, but he could not sacrifice the mission. Thinking quickly, he used the spent hypodermic needle to extract a blood sample, dropped the boy, and sprinted to the getaway craft. He leapt from the hill and barely grabbed onto the flying machine as it rose from the earth. A missile streaked across the sky from the jet, just as its target entered stealth mode. The rocket went wild and obliterated several houses in the neighborhood, including the home from whence the boy had been taken. The pilot of the jet knew he would be unable to follow the fleeing enemy, so he made a vertical descent to the ground. He exited the aircraft and stared at the bewildered child for a long moment. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 1. The barbell slammed back into its supports. A handsome, blue-eyed 19-year-old boy pulled himself to a sitting position on the lifting bench. He was out of breath, but it was a good feeling. The plateau that had plagued him had just been shattered, and he had increased his weight resistance for the first time in weeks. Pushing his mid-length, dark brown hair back from his brow, he considered how far he had come over the years with the clandestine agency. Simply performing his duties had never been enough for the lad. Every day, his goal was to be better than he was the day before. His toned, muscular body had been trained extensively in many ways since his life had been torn to pieces 10 years prior. It had been put back together in a completely different orientation and, if he were being honest, he could hardly remember any life before this. Suddenly, the door to the weight room swung open. "Hey, Devon, you loser! What are you doing in here by yourself?" A cruel, teasing voice belonged to a young man around Devon's age, bulked with muscle mass, who walked with a confident and superior posture and attitude at all times. Devon tried to ignore him, but the aggressor came up and pushed him from the weight bench to the floor. "Wow, maxing out, are we?" The newcomer positioned himself under the barbell and began effortlessly pumping out repetitions. "Yeah, reminds me of when I was 14. "Jason," Devon began to growl furiously. Then he held his tongue. Though punching the bully in the face sounded immensely satisfying, something inside him kept him from wanting a fight. He was still furious, but perhaps it was time to be the bigger man. He grabbed his leather jacket and, without another word, unobtrusively departed. "Yeah, you got nothing, you little nerd," Jason called after him. Devon angrily walked away from the old disjointed weight room he frequented. No one used it because it did not have a much-coveted sound system. It took several minutes to walk there from the main command center, and it smelled weird. Devon savored the solitude and silence that the isolated place offered, and he was ordinarily not bothered whenever he worked out there. With his training interrupted, the youth took an unwavering route around the complex toward the north side of the main headquarters building. After a quick numerical code was punched into a keypad, a deceptively modern door slid open, and Devon entered the only other place where he felt he belonged, the mechanic's garage. Although not actually employed as a mechanic, Devon simply had a way with machines. The world seemed so much simpler when every little part could be put in the right place to make things function properly. This was one thing he was far better at than Jason. When allowed to follow the lead of his inventive mind, His hands formed electrical functions, complicated devices, weapons, or machines that did nothing at all, like technological dominoes. Other times he made repairs to agency equipment for the purpose of keeping the authorities off his back. As he entered the garage, a man named Leonard Salazar brushed past with his hunched gait, clutching his laptop computer. The man did not even seem to notice Devon as he muttered nervously to himself. Salazar was a high-ranking technical analyst who was one of the most trusted members of the organization. He was tall and thin, but just how tall was difficult to determine due to his stooped back. His frayed gray hair was never combed properly, his shoes were untied, his clothes were in a state of disarray, and the signals produced from the gray matter in his skull were generally quite neurotic. Despite all of this, there was no denying that he was brilliant. He also had a fine handlebar mustache. "Hey, Mr. Salazar, how's it going?" Devon called out to the analyst. Salazar jumped upon hearing his name, but calmed when he turned back around and saw Devon. "Well, hello, my boy. I didn't see you there," he greeted. Devon was one of the few people on the face of the earth who Salazar actually trusted. He saw something different in the boy, something that he did not see in anyone else within the agency. Devon was pure, honest, and acted without pretense. "I have something I need to show you, but I have some work I need to do. I have to go. I just have to do a couple things. Very important." Salazar continued muttering as he shuffled away. Devon shook his head and continued into the mechanical haven. Just smelling the pungent, greasy shop odor was enough to cause creativity to flow like the oil which coated half the items in the building. Just when he was about to continue working on his project, a novel automatic tire-changing machine, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Hey, Devon, what's up?" "Nothing, Marcus. Just nothing," Devon replied. Marcus Osweiler was the only one Devon could actually call his friend. He was about the same height as Devon, with neat, light brown hair and a slighter build. "Man, you look really pissed. What happened? Mr. Hurt again?" "Yeah," Devon sighed. "It's just, ever since I was recruited by this place, I've always been second best. No matter how hard I try, I'm always in Jason's shadow, and I can't beat him in anything. Among all of us training to become agents, he's always number one. Marksmanship, strength, speed, exams, I just can't come out on top." "Now, Mr. Persich," Marcus chided mockingly, "don't think too highly of yourself. Some people just aren't meant to be top tier at everything." I know I shouldn't be so obsessed with being the best, but I work my hardest, and I still can't touch his natural talent. He makes it look like he isn't even trying." "Well, you'll always have something that Jason doesn't." "I'll never give up," Devon finished. Okay, I was going to say you have your special personality. Thanks. That, and you'll always have your awesome hair. Jason's days of having hair are numbered because of all the steroids." Marcus burst into laughter, but Devon did not find it especially funny. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 2. Beneath the sun-scorched sands of the southern Mojave Desert, a lone man walked through the sharply air-conditioned corridors toward the laboratory. He wore a suit and tie, but would have looked more natural in royal robes. Haman Nordis was very tall and powerfully built, with long, kinked black hair and eyes to match. He had the obvious presence of a king. After walking through the steel-gray hallways, automatic sliding doors opened in response to his presence. On the other side of them was a facility with a large number of high lab benches. Two scientists stood, awaiting his arrival. Nordis addressed them with confident authority. "Dr. Forkas, have you finished with your latest project? I trust you have something of interest to show me with all the funding I've been giving to the genetic sector of Tartarus." Dr. Aaron Forkas was a man of average build, with shaggy, prematurely gray hair and a lab coat. He addressed the executive in a flat, unexcited tone. "Mr. Nordis, I present the progress of our latest mytho-weapon research, the Medusa Project. Keto, bring it forward." The other scientist, Dr. Gilbert Keto, complied, and pressed a button on a nearby console, which opened a heavy metal door. A small, shadowy figure walked from a dark, prison-like cell into their presence. Dr. Keto scratched his balding head. "It's not necessarily 100% exactly complete," he began, but Dr. Forkas interrupted. "This is but the prototype of the Medusa Project, which I have worked on for the past 4 years. He gestured toward the experiment. "We call it Meta, short for Medusa, of course." Meta had the appearance of a 17-year-old olive-skinned girl. With serpentine-slit pupils and eyes that glowed violet and jet-black hair, it managed to appear extremely formidable, despite the fact that its slender form only stood at 5 foot 4 inches. It had a spiraling snake tattoo down each arm, leg, and 2 across its midsection, as well as sharp, fang-like canine teeth. It wore a black 2-piece skin-tight suit which exposed its midriff, arms, and legs beneath the mid-thigh. Dr. Forkus continued in a bored voice. Its conception was only 3 years past, but I genetically designed it with accelerated aging and developed it in a growth chamber. I removed it about a year ago. It was then extensively trained in fighting techniques, stealth, and assassination. It is adept with all manner of lethal bladed weapons. He walked over to Meta and lifted its right arm. These tattoos are comprised of a virtually indestructible ink which can deflect bullets. It has been trained to be able to do so with its eyes closed. The creature also has been surgically implanted with extensible blades in its forearms, deployable by muscle forces. The scientist paced back to his previous position, then turned to the biological weapon. Meta fangs. Long, gleaming silver swords slid like switchblades from its wrists. As they pierced through its skin, dark crimson blood dripped down the length of the blade onto the floor. Upon contacting the floor tiles, it began to sizzle and smoke. As an unintended consequence of our genetic manipulation, its blood is highly corrosive, capable of eating through nearly any substance. Its fangs are made from a tantalum alloy, which is one of the few materials which has been proven to resist the corrosion. Dr. Forkus walked smoothly across the room. We have, through genetic engineering and brutal neural conditioning, programmed it to be emotionless, voiceless, and highly tolerant of pain. We have ensured that it is incapable of reproduction. It wouldn't do to have such a creature breeding. It also has none of the psychological weaknesses of a human being. It has no remorse, free will, or personality to interfere with its mission. Finally, it has no need of sleep, and we supply it with an intravenous nutritional solution, so it does not need to eat. Truly, it is the perfect assassin. I trust that our results so far warrant further funding. Nordis strode over to Meta. He stooped down and looked into the deadly purple eyes. They burned with the ferocity of a demon, but were simultaneously cold and dead like a rattlesnake. His heart raced faster. How could a synthetic creature built from scratch have such a chilling effect on him? Don't worry, Dr. Forkus stated uninterestedly. It can't turn anyone to stone. He turned away and muttered, Not yet, anyway. Nordis stood to his full height and addressed the men. As you may know, many ancient mythological stories are based on exaggerated versions of truth. Some, in fact, were not as exaggerated as they may seem. There have undoubtedly been supernatural events in ages past. Ever since my father created Tartarus, it has operated on the principle of harnessing the power of the truths behind these legends. He gestured to Meta. What you have created here does not have any real otherworldly power, unless you consider the science of genetic engineering. He paused, then continued. However, it appears to be quite a useful creature for my purposes. His lips formed a dastardly smirk. Let's send it on a test drive. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 3. Devon fired off round after round from his pistol into the human-shaped target. There was no one else in the firing range, but that was no surprise. Nobody in the organization spent as much time in the firing range as he did. He walked up to the target to survey his accuracy. Every bullet had hit a vital area. The young man walked back to the shooting position and began to work through another clip of ammo. With each shot, his rage increased. Everything just seemed so pointless. Graduations were coming up that very day. Within the Institute, only one member of each training class could graduate at the ceremony, with the rest having to wait another year until the next ceremony. If Devon could not make himself stand out among all the students, Jason would be selected for sure. After finishing the last of his bullets, Devon walked up to the target again, seething by this time. Upon reaching it, he could no longer contain his frustration. The boy let out a yell and punched the plastic man, knocking his head clear off. Why am I so steamed up about this? He asked himself out loud. There's more to life than this, right? Despite his wishes, he knew that for him, there really was not. This was an incredibly secretive organization. Once a person is aware of its existence and initiated into its ranks, there is no way out. Agents in the past had been executed for deserting. It was known as the Agency for the Elimination of Great Incursions Against Society, or AEGIS. AEGIS had been formed 25 years prior in order to combat the terrorist organization that called itself Tartarus. The founder of Tartarus created it as a means to control the world through fear and destruction. In part due to his Grecian heritage, he was obsessed with Greek mythology, and the majority of Tartarus' weapons and schemes were based on mythological monsters and stories. The headquarters was hidden somewhere in the deserts of the western United States, but it had never been discovered. A man named Zavadidus founded AEGIS with the sole purpose of thwarting and, ultimately, eliminating Tartarus. Many aspects of AEGIS were named after righteous or divine elements of Greek mythology. They made use of an abandoned factory as a disguise to hide the location of their headquarters. The buildings were far from abandoned, however, as the enormous complex housed a great deal of advanced equipment and technology. Much of the complex existed underground, where the agents lived. This center of operations was located in Southern California, only 15 miles from the large city of Calmingo. Calmingo was a product of the population explosion in Southern California that had occurred within the past decade. It had been built from the ground up 9 years prior and was filled with modern architecture and buildings. The city was trending to be the tech center of the U.S. within the next few years, and the population was continuing to grow. This was not to the benefit of AEGIS, which valued secrecy above all else. Because the massive influx of people increased the chances of the agency being discovered, the quest to find and eliminate Tartarus recently took even greater priority. Interrupting Devon's thoughts, a female voice came over the complex-wide speaker system. "Attention, all available personnel report to the auditorium. All available personnel are requested to attend the graduation ceremonies in the auditorium." Well, this was it. Devon thrust his empty gun into a hip holster and headed back to his room to get changed. As he walked, his constitutively active mind ran different scenarios and the resulting outcomes. Unfortunately, the most likely one was if Jason was the one to be promoted, there was a chance he would use his new authority to stifle Devon's advancement and possibly never allow him to be promoted. It seemed foolish to hope for anything better, but what else could he do? Several minutes later, in the auditorium, the theater-like seats were packed with agents, students, and faculty. A number of the administrators of AEGIS were on the stage. Among them was the analyst Salazar, nervously looking around like a scared cat, his mustache twitching anxiously. Beside him stood a woman, whose name Devon could not come up with, who was behind the podium, coaxing the audience to silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the graduation ceremony. As you know, our modus operandi here at AEGIS is to only promote one member of each training class per year. The competition drives all students involved to improve themselves to the best they can possibly offer. We are assembled here today for that very purpose." She paused and rustled her papers. "Today there are 4 divisions undergoing advancement. To make the announcement of the most capable members of each class is none other than our founder, Zavadidus." There was a huge roar of applause as Deuce took the stage. He was not an especially remarkable man, externally. Dark-skinned, his clean-cut graying hair belied time-granted wisdom, but other than that, he appeared like an ordinary businessman. As soon as he began to speak, however, it was nigh impossible to focus on his plain appearance. He spoke with a power and charisma which demonstrated he was a very strong and passionate individual, with a mentality devoted to justice and order. As the cheering subsided, he began to speak. "Welcome, fellow warriors, patriots, and freedom fighters! Today is a day where a member of each of our training divisions join the elite corps of our ranks, the AEGIS Corps. Although only a total of 4 of you extraordinary people are ordinarily advancing, each and every one of you is essential to our cause. The standard divisions are the backbone of our force. Every man and woman here is an integral part of the Holy Shield, the AEGIS, which protects the world as we know it. The AEGIS Corps is simply a way that we can ensure everyone has something to strive for until all of you are as powerful as you can possibly be." He stopped and looked around the room to assess his audience. Mastering a crowd was something that came quite naturally to him. He continued, "Now I'm sure that everyone is aware of the current urgency to eliminate Tartarus. So, in light of this, I am doing something that has never been done before. I will be promoting 2 members from each division." Devon sat bolt upright. This could be a complete game-changer. His mind began racing furiously, considering possible outcomes. "There is a present need for officers in our militia, and now is the time to replenish our ranks. I don't think I've ever seen such a talented class of soldiers. So I've decided to promote all those who have proven themselves worthy. After this, we will become stronger than ever before. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for. From the Heracles Division, Christoph Fassbender and Donald Parker. From the Achilles Division. Devon was no longer listening. Having Jason and himself both promoted could be a blessing or a curse. It really was up to how Jason responded. If his rival became more hostile, they could end up destroying one another. If he was satisfied with his promotion, perhaps the two could go about their lives without interaction. Time would tell just what would happen. Lastly, from the Perseus Division. Devon sat on the edge of his seat, his heart racing in anticipation. Jason Hurd and Marcus Osweiler. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 4. Meta perched on a sturdy branch in a large black oak tree. The moonlight glinted off its eyes as it scanned a luxurious domicile, like a snake eyeing its prey before a strike. It was wrapped from head to toe in black, obscuring a veritable arsenal of bladed weapons. The mission? Assassinate Peter Blackwell. Blackwell was an influential real estate broker who benefited from the recent boom in Southern California. During a recent excursion to Las Vegas, he had made a detour to explore the desert cliffs. Climbing a large rocky outcropping, the millionaire may have observed some of the goings-on of Tartarus. Although he had not yet reported any potential discoveries to the authorities, he was still labeled as a threat to Tartarus goals and had to be exterminated. Meta's instructions were to infiltrate the mansion undetected, terminate Blackwell, and withdraw. Although it was past midnight, one light illuminated a room on the second floor of the large house. Blackwell was awake in his office. Meta waited in the tree, which was around 50 feet from the building, for over an hour. However, the yellowish glow continued burning into the night. The man must have been working tirelessly through the night, or perhaps he was watching dirty videos on his computer. Regardless, the night was slipping away. It was no longer time to wait, but to act. Meta removed a pitch-black, high-carbon steel throwing kunai from a fold in its outfit. The knife flashed for an instant through the night air as it was hurled at a telephone pole 60 feet away. It severed a power line on its path, and the persistent bulb in the abode abruptly died. Meta prepared to leap to the balcony just outside Blackwell's office when a bright beam of light ignited. Blackwell had kept a super bright LED flashlight in his desk. A direct approach on the room would likely be ineffective at this point. To avoid being detected, the assassin instead dropped to the ground, forced open a now unalarmed window on the first floor, and slid inside. The moonlight was unable to penetrate the walls of the mansion, and the inside was as black as ink. Meta closed its eyes, and the house appeared to be ablaze with heat signatures. The creature was capable of seeing in the infrared spectrum, utilizing subdermal thermal detection pits beneath its eyes, courtesy of the snake DNA that had been used in its design. A glowing red form lying on a bed indicated the room it had entered was inhabited. It was the cleaning lady's bedroom. A quick plunge with the knife eliminated immediate threat of exposure. There was another sleeping woman in the top bunk, but the killer decided to proceed toward the target instead of risking noise and eliminating the other cleaner. It stalked through the darkness, detecting the presence of all the servants in the building. Sensitive ears picked up the sound of creaking footsteps as Blackwell began descending the stairs. Meta ducked beneath a doorway, the intense ray from the flashlight shining down from the staircase. The assassin's infrared was overpowered by the heat being emitted from the torch, but it could still ascertain the position of the target. Blackwell crossed the room and descended another set of stairs into the basement. Meta followed at a distance, eyes open and focused on the back of the man. On reaching the landing, Blackwell turned a corner into a large utility room. His bare feet felt the cold cement floor as the light from the flashlight fell upon a high-tech-looking generator. "Piece of shit," he muttered under his breath. "What's the point of installing a geothermal backup generator if I have to come down here and turn it on myself? Something must not be set up right." As he walked across the room, he pulled a cord hanging from the ceiling so he could confirm the power's return when the room would light up. He activated the manual control switch on the generator and waited. A whirring engine sound was heard as the machine began to run. The bare bulb above shone a dim yellow light to indicate that power had indeed been restored to the building. "Well, that takes care of that." Turning around, the man froze. The black-clad Meta was standing there less than 20 feet away. He was stunned for an instant, which was the extent of the time that he still had to live. The assassin whipped 2 razor-sharp obsidian throwing needles with deadly accuracy through its target's eyes and into his brain, killing him instantly. Blackwell collapsed to the floor with a thump. Without a second glance, Meta turned and began ascending the stairs. Upon reaching the still dark first floor, it resumed infrared vision. As it made its way toward the window it had entered, a blaze of light came from the maid's room. The surviving servant had heard the thud of Blackwell's body and awakened to investigate. Meta silently sprinted up the stairs to the second floor and into Blackwell's office. It rapidly pushed open the large glass doors leading onto the balcony. With a running start, it leapt the full 50 feet into the tree where it had begun the mission. Back at the genetics facility, Dr. Forkus, Dr. Keto, and Heyman Nordis observed Meta's exploits on a monitor. It displayed a feed from a miniature camera which had been attached to their creation's clothing. "Incredible!" Nordis laughed. "What a monster! You should be proud of yourselves." Yes, I guess we are," Dr. Keto said awkwardly. "Thank you, sir," Dr. Forkus replied without enthusiasm. "How soon can you get me more of these?" Nordis asked. "Meta is merely a prototype," Dr. Forkus coldly answered. "Are you certain that you don't want to wait for the finished creature?" Nordis placed a hand on Dr. Forkus' shoulder and replied to the contrary. "My friend, didn't you see the effectiveness of that weapon? Imagine the opportunities that we could have. World leaders across the globe would live in fear of us, and anyone that we see fit would meet their end." He paused to consider the possibilities. "What makes a god a god? Fear. When all the earth fears that we could end their lives at any instant, it's the first step to being the gods of this world." Dr. Forkus sighed. "Well, if I used a sample of Meta's blood, a 2-year incubation period, 1 year of training, about 3 years. Good. Do it. I want these assassins." "May I prescribe an additional trial for my creature?" Dr. Forkus insisted. "It is not fully proven, and I want to test how it handles a more intense situation." "Fine. Run another test," Nordis reluctantly acquiesced. "I expect excellent results once again." As Nordis was walking away, he turned and looked the lead geneticist in the eyes. "Oh, and Dr. Forkus, your genetics department will receive no further funding until the metaclones are complete. I'm sure you'll understand." AEGIS Wars, Chapter 5. Devon's heart jumped like he had been struck by lightning, and he felt lightheaded. Marcus? How? It had to be a mistake. Slumping into his seat, he desperately tried to come up with an answer. Marcus did not have anywhere near the skill level of Jason or himself. What could have happened? Devon was still stunned in disbelief, and was completely oblivious as everyone whose name had been called ascended to the stage amidst cheering and applause. Deuce personally congratulated every one of the promoted agents and justified his selection of each candidate. "Jason Hurd, there was little question that he would be promoted, who has broken nearly every record for weightlifting in Aegis history. His prowess is very impressive in many of the required skills for this promotion. This young man is made up of everything that makes Aegis what it is." Devon struggled not to vomit, but he forced himself to listen to what Deuce had to say about Marcus. "Marcus Osweiler. Although he doesn't have the strength or skill that Jason has, he has expressed immense leadership potential, and I believe that he has what it takes to be one of the greatest leaders of our organization." Leadership potential? That was it? That was why he'd been promoted to a member of the AEGIS Corps? Marcus had never shown the slightest bit of ambition. He had shed no blood sparring in advanced martial arts with the AEGIS Corps, never run on mountain trails until he couldn't breathe, and never spent many sleepless nights studying survival techniques and battle strategies. He hardly deserved janitorial duties, much less preferential promotion. Leadership potential. Devon scoffed as he marched in silence toward the secluded weight room. He needed some time to think, alone. As he reached the door of his fortress of solitude, there came a voice from behind. "Hey, Mr. Persich, hold up!" It was Marcus. Devon took a deep breath and silently prayed to he didn't know who for patience and serenity. It was not working. "Hey, Marcus, congratulations," he half-heartedly stated. "Hey, thanks, man. Better luck next year." "Yeah, maybe. They wanted someone to guide the sheep, and I think they picked the right guy for the job." Devon desperately tried to suppress his anger. Granted one wish right now, it would be for Marcus to be gone. Very far away. It would be safer for both of them, and Devon wanted to be alone so he could think. He began to turn toward the door. "Don't turn your back on me, Devon," Marcus shouted. "I wasn't done talking to you." Devon whipped around. "It didn't take too long for your new position to make you a real jerk, you know that?" He spat. Then he took a step toward his friend and yelled, "We both know that I deserve to be promoted, not you." Marcus responded with indignation. "Just because you can lift weights and shoot guns doesn't mean you have what it takes to be a leader. I always knew I was better than you. I just didn't want to brag when I had no authority to back it up." Devon's blood was boiling, and his heart was beating like a bass drum. He grabbed Marcus by the shirt. "You didn't seem to have any problem talking before. In fact, you could never shut up." "Hands off, you asshole! I'll have you court-martialed." Devon pushed Marcus away and opened the door to the weight room. Marcus screamed, "You know what? Screw off!" after Devon as he slammed the door behind him. In the still silence at last, Devon leaned motionless against the door until his heart slowed to a more normal rate. "I've lost my dreams and my only friend on the same day," Devon thought. "I'm such an idiot." Finally able to stop and contemplate, he sank down to the floor. He had failed at the only thing he had devoted his life to accomplish. What was the point of going on? Life just seemed quite meaningless all of a sudden. He was stuck. The more he thought about it, the more he's convinced there must be more to the world than this. Some greater reason for living. Some reason he was alive. But what? It was long past time to put things in perspective. Perhaps all his life he had been fighting for the wrong purpose. His potent mind would not let him believe life was about just getting by and disappearing into nothingness. There had to be a reason. Ambition and vainglory had never been so obviously unfulfilling. Maybe he was supposed to fight for people who were not as strong enough to defend themselves. Maybe there was another purpose for living, much bigger than lofty goals and personal successes, fighting for something greater than oneself. What am I fighting for, though? He wondered. I swear I'll find it. Whether for freedom, or justice, or some higher purpose out there, I'll find it. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 6. Several days later, Meta was once again dispatched to test its abilities. Deep in a coniferous forest, an outpost belonging to AEGIS had been discovered. This strategic command center was garrisoned with approximately a dozen agents. The commander stationed there was a member of the AEGIS Corps, Marcel Ingalls. This small stronghold also held several Tartarus agents captive. Meta's mission was to break into the facility, rescue the captured men, and eliminate as many AEGIS soldiers as possible. The waning moon was partially obscured by dark clouds, and a strong breeze chilled the night air. From its perch in a dark California pine, Meta noticed none of these things. The only thing it could comprehend was the lethal assignment, and all the destruction which would accompany it. The assassin was around 500 feet from the outpost, but there were 2 guards out on patrol near its vantage tree. They would be the first to die. A cloud dimmed the silvery light of the moon, and Meta closed its eyes to begin the attack. The 2 AEGIS soldiers appeared as red silhouettes below, oblivious to the storm about to hit. It hurled a kunai downward at the first heat source with perfect accuracy and enough force to penetrate armor. The first guard fell to the ground. The second guard, reacting quickly, looked up into the trees and began to open fire with an automatic weapon. The patrollers were equipped with night vision goggles, and now that he knew to look up, the surviving man was able to see the assailant. Meta leapt into the air toward another tree. It then kicked off that tree in a diagonal slant toward the ground. Like a deadly projectile, it careened into the chest of the second guard while stabbing with the kunai. He was killed instantly. Meta then stood up and proceeded toward the outpost. On the east side of the building was a fenced-in area with a power generator. Meta attempted to sabotage it by using its knives to cut the wires running to the building. Sparks flew and the generator died, but the lights within the outpost merely flickered and defiantly remained on. There must have been a backup generator within the building, and it worked much better than Blackwell's did. This setback did little to delay the assassin. It climbed up a power conduit running down the side of the east wall, then jumped onto a flat roof on the second level. On this concrete surface was the metallic vent of an air duct. With minimum effort, Meta ripped the grate off the opening and crawled inside. Shimmying along the narrow passages like a snake, it entered the building. After several minutes of inching along the air duct, light shone up through a screen in the ceiling of the room below. Meta peered down into this area. It was a computer lab filled with consoles, monitors, and control panels. There was an agent working on the computer, almost directly beneath the assassin's viewpoint. As he examined the displays, he mumbled to himself. The main power generator's out. How did that happen? Only Brian and I are still awake, and we can't fix this. Javier could. Should I wake him up? Nah, we'll just get it in the morning. Secondary generator's running fine. He stretched his arm above his head, then out to the sides. Just as he did this, Meta punched the grate for the air vent, sending it crashing upon the agent's head. He was stunned for a moment as the assassin dropped into the room and slit his throat. Following the instant of clattering noise, silence returned. Using its advanced senses, Meta knew there was a guard stationed in the hallway just outside the door of the room. He was playing on his Nintendo DS and did not hear the crash. The assassin looked up and began sneaking out of the computer lab. As it came to the doorway, it heard the guard curse. "Damn it, Giratina, I'm about frickin' ready to give up on Platinum for good." Meta leapt from the doorway to ambush him. The guard dropped his game in shock and attempted to reach for his gun, but it was far too late. Meta dove forward with 2 kunai and eviscerated its victim in an instant. He doubled over and fell to the ground without a cry. The killer did not give a second thought to the men that had perished, and moved on. It stalked through the compound, searching for the Tartarus agents it was supposed to rescue. Eventually, it descended into a basement floor and came across an impounding zone for holding prisoners. There was no sign of any human being, Aegis or Tartarus. With only a second of hesitation, Meta considered the primary objective of the mission complete. Secondary objective? Kill everyone in the outpost. It ascended the stairs back to the ground floor and closed its eyes. Heat signatures appeared in 2 adjacent rooms, 50 feet down on the left side of a hallway. Like the predator it was, Meta snuck down the hallway and entered the first room. There were 3 sets of double bunks, but some were empty. There was a woman occupying each of the 2 bottom beds, and one in the top bunk against the wall on the right. The assassin approached the first sleeping agent and plunged a knife into her throat, dispatching her in silence. It proceeded to the second bed and repeated the process. Directly above slept the final woman. There were metal bars supporting a mattress of the top bunk. Meta thrust a kunai between the bars and through the mattress, stabbing his victim from beneath. The agent gasped and attempted to cry out, but a second knife penetrated the mattress and finished her. Meta continued into the next room, which housed the male agents. These quarters contained 4 sets of bunk beds, but there were only 4 men inhabiting them. The set against the right wall had an agent in the top and bottom. Then the adjacent bunk had a man in only the top. On the far end of the room, the set was occupied on the bottom layer. Presumably, the 4 open beds were used by the agents who had already met their demise. As it walked into the room, Meta noticed the guy in the lone top bunk stir. "Alicia?" His speech was slackened by sleep. "Alicia, are you okay?" Meta realized that stealth was now out of the equation. It responded by leaping forward and vaulting up onto the bed using the railing at its foot. It straddled the bewildered agent and murdered him with one stroke. It then turned and whipped several obsidian throwing needles across the room at the man in the leftmost bed. By this time, the other 2 men had jolted awake. The one in the bottom bunk flipped the light switch, bathing the room in brightness. He cringed at the exposed carnage which had already taken place. Meta's senses were temporarily overwhelmed by the light as it jumped down to the floor. The first agent attempted to punch the assassin, but it moved its head to dodge and countered with a palm strike to the ribs. The second man dropped to the floor and rushed the assailant. Meta pulled a knife and thrust forward to stab him. He blocked the knife to the side and released a round punch with his left hand. Meta dodged backward. The first agent had recovered and used a low spin kick while the assassin was off guard. It jumped over the kick and in midair hurled several needles into his vulnerable torso. The other man pulled a 5-inch blade from next to his bed and slashed toward Meta in a wide arc across his body. It blocked at his elbow, then grabbed the wrist. It then chopped out his right leg and knocked him to the floor. Meta ripped the knife from his grip, severed his spinal cord, and threw the blade to finish off the guy who had attempted the low spin. On the other side of the room, the man who had been hit with the needles was still alive, but wounded. He recovered enough to remove a pistol from underneath his mattress and began to fire at the assassin. It deflected the bullets with the snake tattoo on his palm. As it slowly walked across the room, the agent continued to fire ineffectively. He was panicking, and terrified tears began to form in his eyes as impending death approached. Meta knocked each bullet aside until he had emptied his clip. It then stabbed him quickly in the chest, which finished the last of the soldiers. The only person who remained was the commander, Marcel Ingalls. Marcel was already awake when the bloodbath began. After hearing the shooting, he prepared himself to rush out and help his men. Before he was able to dash to their aid, the night went silent. Either his men had terminated the intruder, or they were all dead. Either way, someone would be coming for him, and he would be ready. This elite member of the AEGIS Corps was referred to by his men as the Pitiless Priest. He was known for being a pious believer in God, but was merciless and brutal to anyone he thought deserved punishment. This included allies and enemies alike. The man was in his office when he heard the commotion. This room is Spartan in nature, with no decorations or embellishments, save a small golden cross standing on his heavy wooden desk. The office also had a case of weapons stocked for just such an occasion. Ingalls armed himself with an automatic rifle and plenty of ammunition. He then stood behind his desk and waited. It was deathly silent. The commander held his breath and coolly waited for the door to open. This was not his first rodeo. Although still a fairly young man, he had been hardened in battle in the Middle East before joining with AEGIS. His brown-black hair was shaved into a crew cut, and his clean-cut face accented aquiline facial features. Being a lefty, he held the weapon against his left shoulder as his ears were straining to pick up the slightest indication of the assassin entering the room. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a flurry of throwing needles flew into the room. Ingalls knocked them aside with a leftward sweep of his rifle. He pulled the trigger, but his gun was out of position following his defensive maneuver, and the bullets went wild. As fast as he could, the man lifted the weapon back into position. Meta rushed toward him while the gun released a torrent of bullets as it moved. It leapt into the air to the right and threw a cone. Ingalls tried to dodge, but it hit him in the left arm, and his machine gun flew across the room. Reacting quickly, he kicked the large wooden desk across the floor at his attacker. As it landed, Meta flip-kicked the sliding desk. The wooden mass lifted off the ground and crashed to the floor between them. Ingalls withdrew a 12-inch blade Bowie knife with his right hand and sprinted toward his enemy. He vaulted over the wooden desk and attempted to stab the assassin. It blocked his arm, but he followed by twisting into a back kick directed into its midsection. Meta recoiled backward from the strike, and Ingalls continued putting fierce pressure on him, slashing with his deadly knife. Meta unsheathed the fang blade from his right arm and swung in a large arc. The killing edge, coated with his lethal ichor, sliced directly through the bone. With one smooth motion, Meta continued with an upward slash. Ingalls' right arm was severed just below the shoulder. He screamed in pain, both from the cut and from the corrosive effects of the toxic blood. Meta then grabbed Ingalls by the collar and pinned him up against a wall. It stared blankly into his eyes for a brief moment before plunging its fang into his gun, finishing him. Dr. Forkus and Dr. Keto observed the events once again with their hidden camera. After Ingalls had been killed, there were several seconds of silence. Dr. Keto cleared his throat. Well, Nordis will certainly be pleased. Nordis had been unable to observe this mission due to having important matters to tend to elsewhere in Tartarus. Our creation certainly is lethal. Dr. Forkus was still silent, so Dr. Keto continued to attempt to start a conversation. There were no prisoners to rescue at all. What happened? Dr. Forkus responded without moving from his position, his chin resting on folded hands on the table. There never were any. You are as well aware as I am of the self-destructing implant in all of our soldiers. There are never any prisoners. We can never allow any men to reveal our secrets. Dr. Keto bit his lip, then spoke again. You seem upset, Aaron. Aren't you happy with our creation? Dr. Forkus slammed his fists on the table. Our creation is nothing more than an incomplete, failed attempt at perfection. The irate geneticist stood and began pacing angrily. That fool Nordis speaks of being a god. He doesn't begin to understand. I have the power of a god in the palm of my hands. Science is synonymous with the supernatural. With more research, I could push the limits of what we know as reality. The impossible could be possible. A real spirit of power, a god, or a demon, could be under my control. And that blind idiot is so obsessed with his own piddling goals and plans. He knows nothing and is incapable of thinking of what we are so close to achieving. Well, all of that aside, Meta really showed what it could do, Dr. Keto consoled. Nordis sees that we're brilliant. After making him his assassins, maybe he'll let us proceed with the research that you're talking about. You retard! Dr. Forkus responded with fury. Do you want to know why I devised that test? Do you want to know why I sent Meta there, knowing there were no prisoners? I wanted it to get killed, so I couldn't get a genetic sample, and I would have an excuse not to make Nordis his damned army of toy soldiers. What a waste of my time and brain power. I can create perfection. World domination be damned! I couldn't care less about this whole damn planet. There's so much more than I'm capable of creating. Dr. Forkus stomped out of the room and slammed the door behind him, leaving the milder scientist baffled and alone. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 7. In the days since the graduation, Devon had been struggling with his situation. On the surface, it felt as though a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He no longer felt pressure to try to be the best, because he knew it was too late for him to attain his original goals. At a deeper level, however, it now felt as though there was no real purpose for life. He had no friends, no family, and nothing to really strive to complete. Was there something else out there to live for? If there was, he would find it. In the meantime, he continued training to keep his body and skills at their peak. Marcus had not spoken to him since their altercation, and Devon had the feeling that his former friend had no intentions of making amends. Oh well, they were never actually very close anyway. Marcus had always been the sort of derogatory friend whose primary goal seemed to be making everyone around him feel stupid. Thankfully, however, Justin had not bothered him since being promoted. Devon was more than happy to keep it that way, and kept his head down without drawing attention to himself. The news of Marcel Ingels's death and the decimation of the Aegis outpost shook headquarters. When Devon heard the account given by the cleanup crew, he was as shocked as everyone else. An Aegis outpost had never been attacked like this before. Every single soldier stationed there had been killed. Even Marcel, who Devon knew was a powerful man, had met his end. What was more puzzling was the fact that no information, data, weapons, or valuables had been taken, and all of the casualties had come from knife wounds or throwing needles. This was a truly terrifying development. It was nearly midnight, and Devon was meditating on everything that had transpired recently. He was alone in the Perseus Division sleeping quarters, getting settled into bed. Suddenly, Leonard Salazar burst into the room. Like a small rabbit at a dog show, he looked around in a mad panic. The disturbed man slammed the door shut and began enthusiastically sliding bunks around the room. He worked up a sweat, piling all the beds, aside from the one on which Devon was sitting, to barricade the entryway. It was fairly comical, watching Salazar frantically rearrange the furniture with his wiry frame. All the time, he was muttering something that sounded like, "They're gonna kill me, they're gonna kill me, they're gonna kill me." Mr. Salazar? Devon ventured, somewhat taken aback by the man's most recent antics. There was no response, as he searched the room for anything else to use for fortifying the door. Devon tried again. Mr. Salazar? Still nothing. Devon crossed the room towards Salazar while the elder ripped wooden boards up from the floor and propped them up against the pile. Devon quickly slapped his hands on Salazar's shoulders and shook him several times. Mr. Salazar! Ah, Devon, thank goodness. I have something I need to show you. He sat on the cot where Devon had been preparing to sleep, opened his laptop, and began to furiously click and type. I've never told anyone else what I'm about to tell you, and we're probably both going to get killed for this. That's just great. Thanks. Devon stood behind Salazar and looked around apprehensively. I'm one of the most trusted analysts in Aegis, you know that. Every piece of data that we collect goes through me. Well, I've gotten to watch Deuced for years. The man is insane! He's totally fanatical about secrecy and destiny and whatnot. A few years back, he came to me. Once we defeat Tartarus, Aegis has no other reason to exist. Deuce will kill us all. Aegis will have completed its destiny, and no one must know of our existence. Devon did not even know what to say. Salazar's very last marble may have rolled down the bathroom drain this morning while he trimmed his fabulous mustache. So, I've been hiding data for years now. Every time I come across any evidence that would allow us to be able to pinpoint Tartarus, I buried it so no one would ever find it. Everything that I ever hid from them is here on this laptop. But now, oh god! Salazar finally stopped pounding on his computer and showed a screenshot of an Aegis agent in a hallway. Due to the generic interior design of their buildings, Devon could not determine the exact location. The analyst clicked on the image and a blurred video began to play. After several seconds, a shadowy figure leapt into the hallway and eviscerated the guard with 2 knives. Devon jumped when it happened, but could not turn away. The video was chilling, but not entirely helpful. It was impossible to get a good look at who or what it was that did the deed. Now this, oh my god, they finished it! Some kind of killer monster assassin of death! Salazar paused the video on the corpse of the guard. Now what do I do? Tartarus has monsters like this now. If I give Deuce all the data that I have, he'll kill me for hiding it. But if I don't, then Tartarus monsters will kill me. I'm doomed. I'm gonna die. Devon was silent for a moment. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. Deadly assassins aside, This guy had been acting in a subversive manner for years now, and then decided to unload all of it and make him a co-conspirator? What did he just get himself into? Okay, what do you want me to do? I don't know. I just had to tell somebody, and you're the only one I can trust. Nothing's safe. The creature came through the air ducts. The air ducts! Nothing's safe! Just then, someone began pounding on the door. Salazar nearly leapt out of his skin. Hey, Devon, are you in there? We want to get some frickin' sleep. It was some of the other members of the Perseus division. They tried forcing the door open, but it wouldn't budge. Do you have a girl in there or something? Devon began pushing the bunks aside. No, it's just, Mr. Salazar. Salazar screamed. What? Came the voice from the other side of the door. I mean, it's nobody. As Devon was moving the last of the cots out of the way, Salazar pushed his laptop into his hands. Take care of this. Please, remember, don't trust anyone. He then sprinted across the room, jumped headfirst out the first floor window, and ran into the night. Great. Now Devon was holding treasonous equipment for a possibly deranged old doomsayer. There was only one thing he could think to do with it. The boy quickly threw the computer into the hole exposed by the ripped-up floorboards and rapidly put the wooden slats back into place to conceal it. The other trainees finally forced the door open. Devon, what are you doing? Devon laid the last of the slats on top of the laptop. I was replacing some floorboards, and I had to move the beds, he lied. Wow, that's random. Mr. Handyman, eh? Okay, who is Mr. Salazar? AEGIS Wars, Chapter 8. Fantastic! Nordis exclaimed as he reviewed the footage from Meta's last attack on the outpost several days later. This is just what I wanted to see. He rotated the swivel chair in which he sat and addressed the geneticists. I trust that you have begun manufacturing more of the Meta? Dr. Forkus stood with his arms crossed. Yes, the production has begun. Perfect! You said that it would be about 3 years until they're ready, correct? Yes. Fine, he chuckled to himself. Dr. Forkus, you're a most fascinating man. You've created an incredible monster, and you're still not pleased. In fact, you seem reluctant to even let me use it. Dr. Forkus was silent. Well, I can wait 3 years for my army of assassins. Time flies when the world is within your grasp. However, I have many irons in the fire, so to speak. I may not even have any use for your monster in 3 years. He stood up from his chair, and as he towered over the scientists, he continued to speak. Since you have commenced the production of the clones, the first is now expendable. I say we get as much use out of it as we can. Order it to assassinate Zavada Deuce, Commander-in-Chief of our longtime nemesis, Aegis. Dr. Forkus raised his eyebrows, and Dr. Keto gasped. Didn't see that coming. We've known the location of their headquarters for years. Their cloaking technology can hide them from the government, but not from us. As you know, our Helm of Darkness stealth technology thwarts their pitiful attempts at tracking our vehicles or base of operations, but they have no such thing. Aegis' sheer force is all that has prevented us from crushing them. Now is the chance to strike down the head. We send your Medusa prototype to eliminate the leader of our enemy. If it succeeds, our road ahead will be simple. If it fails, we have lost nothing, and will do as much damage as we can with our disposable force. Have it attack immediately. Nordis began to leave their presence. Then, in true Columbo fashion, he turned and addressed them again. Oh, and your funding is still restricted to use on producing my assassins. I'm sure that isn't a problem, right? Dr. Forkus' reply was stone-faced silence as Nordis walked from the room. The next night, Meta was once again deployed on its dealings of death. It had no comprehension that this would be its last mission. No feeling of betrayal. Only a target. The assassin was hidden in a thicket on the edge of a forest, staring at Aegis headquarters. The Aegis complex was situated in a clearing, surrounded by a forest on 3 sides, and a mountain on the northwest. Meta examined the edifices. The main building appeared to be an old, abandoned factory of sorts at first. It was 3 stories high, with a section that reached to 4 stories. There were towers that at first appeared to be smokestacks, but had been modified to have searchlights and heavy artillery. Although there were outdoor training grounds, the agents had been advised not to spend an excessive amount of time outside to decrease the odds of detection. The deceptive building concealed a state-of-the-art facility with a hidden aircraft hangar, training center, advanced computer systems, and other classified information. The monster did not know any of this, nor did it care. As the eerie purple eyes luminesced in the moonlight, it rose from its location and prepared to move in for the kill. That same night, Devon was unable to sleep. Even though he could be in danger due to the information he now knew, his insomnia was not due to worry or stress. For some unexplained reason, he felt uneasy, and his stomach had a tingling feeling as though it were on top of a roller coaster. The youth put on some clothes, threw his leather jacket over his shoulder, and walked down to the mechanic's garage. It had been several uneventful days since Salazar's bizarre visit to his room. The crazed analyst's predictions of doom had thus far been ungrounded, but the possibility of what he had said still clung in Devon's mind. Nothing like working with safe, predictable, unfluctuating machines to make life seem less complicated. Enswathed with darkness, Meta crept into the clearing. It avoided the sweeping beams of the searchlights and made a path toward the central building. Keen eyes had spotted a metal, upside-down J-shaped exhaust vent on the third floor. The assassin moved with a determined, undistracted purpose. The prime objective was to maintain invisibility, eliminate Zavadidus, the leader of AEGIS, and withdraw. However, a secondary, conditional mission had been given. If stealth was compromised, Meta was to first force through to assassinate Deuce, then kill everything in sight. No contingency for self-preservation had been given. It climbed parkour-style up the side of the building, using downspouts, windowsills, and wires to gain advance up to the third floor. Upon reaching the flat roof, it once again crawled into the ventilation system. The air duct sloped downward for a time, then leveled out. Meta wriggled through the vent for several minutes. Suddenly, it heard a beeping sound. The assassin pushed backward as hard as it could, just as an explosion rocked the air duct. A motion sensor bomb had been set inside the air vent by a certain paranoid individual. Meta fell through a hole in the bottom of the duct due to the blast and crashed into a pile of metal fixtures, nearly landing on Devon. The explosion knocked the lights out in the garage, and the room was plunged into darkness. Devon shielded his head and face from the debris with his hands. As he slowly lowered his forearms, he was able to make out a figure by the glow of the lamplights outside the building. Although he couldn't tell who or what it was obvious that it was dangerous. The intruder suddenly leapt up and threw several of its obsidian throwing needles at him. Reacting almost preemptively, Devon dove out of the way, whipping his jacket in a circular motion. The needles were caught up into the leather and caused no harm. The young man then readied himself for action, eyeing his attacker to see what he was up against. Blue irises locked with violet, which glowed in contrast to the dim interior, and the young man shuddered involuntarily. Time seemed to freeze as they stared into each other's eyes, but it was only an instant. Without pressing the attack, the assassin dashed through the dimmed garage and crashed out a window into the clearing outside the building. What just happened? Devon wondered. He looked at the leather jacket in his hand and found that he had ensnared 2 razor-sharp obsidian throwing needles. The knowledge that he had been that close to death made his legs wobble and his head dizzy, but he stood strong and made his way through the dark garage to the door to the inside of the complex. After smashing through the window, Meta crouched in the shadows just outside. The creature was covered with burns from the explosion and had been gashed open in numerous places. Its poisonous blood seeped out of cuts from the glass window pane, but the wounds were quickly and almost visibly healing. Its imbued healing factor was restoring it to functioning capacity very rapidly. Just then, 2 guards ran past to investigate the explosion. Meta slashed one in the leg as he ran past, then leapt into the air as he fell, silhouetted against the moon for a brief instant. It landed with the knife stabbing downward, pouncing upon him like a mouse line. The second guard whipped out his gun. "Die, freak!" he cried as he opened fire. Meta deflected several shots with tattooed hands and feet, but retreated when the hail of bullets was too much. As it sprinted around a corner of the building, there were several more guards. One quickly stabbed forward with a knife. The assassin jumped backward, and the other guards began to fire. Meta blocked and dodged the shots, and leapt up the side of the building, pushing off several ledges until it reached the flat top of the third floor. From the fourth-story section, Deuce looked out a window at the events transpiring as he calmly talked on the phone. All troops switched to non-lethal weapons. I want this thing alive. Tranquilizers, electrical shocks, whatever it takes. While still using his communication device, Meta spotted Deuce through the window. Primary objective. It began to sprint across the roof surface toward the commander. Bullets flew up around the edges of the roof, but the center remained safe. Just then, a hatch on the roof opened, and Aegis soldiers began ascending onto the roof from the inside of the building. Meta quickly engaged them at close range to prevent them from firing their weapons. With a flurry of strikes and slashes, it took out the men and women who had tried to impede the attack and continued toward Deuce. He coolly lifted his phone, said a few words, and moved away from the window. Meta picked up speed, running across the rooftop in the direction of the fourth story. Suddenly, one of the futuristic jets began a vertical takeoff just on the other side of the fourth-story protrusion. It lifted high into the air, then moved over top of the complex. Instead of firing at the assassin and risking destroying the building, many ropes like black snakes coiled down, and agents began dropping to the roof between Meta and its target. They began firing tranquilizer darts in this direction. It dodged and weaved, blocking some darts with its kudu. The hovering jet descended to be level with the top of the building and opened fire with a machine gun. The assassin changed course and charged toward the aircraft. Dodging the stream of bullets, it leapt over the jet. As it was in the air, it was hit in the leg with a stray dart. This threw off its balance, and it fell hard to the earth from over 3 stories. Impact from the ground shattered both ankles and caused structural damage throughout the legs. Meta attempted to stand up, but collapsed. It was unaccustomed to walking with this major injury. As it dragged itself out of the clearing toward the forest, another tranquilizer dart whizzed through the night air and injected its contents into the creature's back. Meta continued crawling, trying to fight the drugs. The Aegis agents made their way to the now defenseless attacker and surrounded it. They fired several more tranquilizer darts into the prone form, just to make sure the chemicals would take effect. Meta's body resisted them to a point, but the excessive doses were overcoming it. The soldiers began kicking and beating it, partly to keep it from moving, and partly out of rage and vengeance for fallen comrades. The last thing Meta saw as it closed its eyes was the bruising feet of the soldier. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 9. Oh, we dodged a bullet here, Devon. Salazar and Devon stood outside the sterile biological laboratory, staring in through large glass windows. It was reminiscent of a hospital nursery, but the activities that occurred inside were of a far darker nature. I still can barely believe that one of my traps worked, Salazar continued. I mean, I set plenty around the complex, but for that monster to attack and we make it out alive. Shocking. Devon watched the white coat-garbed scientists within the laboratory bustle about, preparing for some type of procedure. What happens to her? He asked, gesturing toward the unconscious body strapped to an operation table. It had been stripped of its weapons and outer clothing, leaving only the tight black two-piece base layer. Oh, Tartarus' latest weapon? Well, it's going to be vivisected to get whatever information about Tartarus that we can. Devon turned and began walking away. Salazar called after him. Wait, aren't you going to stay and watch? It almost killed you. Devon did not turn around. No, thank you. I'm not really into that sort of thing. Well, that's it then, Dr. Forkas said, without emotion. The hidden camera had been removed along with Meta's external clothing, so they could no longer observe the monster's actions. He turned and began to leave the room. Dr. Keto, who also watched this final mission, looked down at his folded hands somberly. What's next for us? He asked. Back to work on real progress. Back in the Aegis lab, the scientists continued their preparations for the vivisection. Some of them had lost friends or loved ones to the creature, and they were full of pent-up rage. This would be an interesting procedure indeed. As they moved about, no one noticed Meta's eyes shoot open. The amount of tranquilizer used would have been enough to stop an adult's heart, or at least keep them out of commission for days. Tartarus' creation, however, had a hypermetabolism which was able to process and deactivate the drug in under 2 hours. It struggled against the bonds holding it, but to no avail. They were too secure. There was only one option left. The desperate creature bit down on its own tongue, causing blood to swiftly fill its mouth. Meta took aim and spit splotches of the dark red fluid at the straps wrapped around its wrists. The acidic ichor seeped into the bonds. There was a sizzling sound as they dissolved to a point that Meta could break the metal holding its arms. The scientists were on the other end of the operating room and had not yet noticed. Salazar, however, turned white as an albino polar bear blinking in a blizzard, watching in horror as Meta began to slowly sit up on the table. The beast slid its fangs out through its wrists and sliced through restraints on its feet. Salazar shrieked, "Oh my God, it's gonna kill us all!" He backed away slowly until Meta leapt and crashed through the glass and separated them. He cried again and sprinted down the hall. Upon smashing through the glass window, Meta had landed on its injured legs, which could provide little support. It collapsed to its knees. The scientists screamed and ran in the same direction as Salazar as Meta struggled to its feet. Although its healing powers were very potent, its body had been unable to repair its legs due to fighting off the tranquilizer. Somehow, with a neural mishap which would truly baffle its creators, the assassin had no recollection of its mission. Animal instincts were kicking in, and the only thing driving it was the will to survive. It began to limp down the hallway opposite that through which the scientists had fled. A short time later, sounds of shouts and running feet began to fill the building. The soldiers had been informed of Meta's escape, and were hunting it through the halls. It staggered through the complex, turning down a variety of corridors to avoid the pursuers. This level of AEGIS headquarters was a veritable maze of bleach-white hallways, which confused the creature as it fled. Eventually, it was hopelessly lost and found itself in a dead end. The AEGIS agents searched in the direction that the scientists had run, assuming that Meta was hunting them. For some time, they were unsuccessful at tracking it. Meanwhile, Devon heard all the alarms as well. He grabbed his gun and ran back to the laboratory to see what all the commotion was. There, he saw tiny holes in the floor burned by drops of Meta's blood. This trail went in the opposite direction of where everyone was searching. He followed the marks through the corridors until he found the monster. Its fangs were still out, and it was backed into a corner of a dead end. This hallway had a door that led outside, but it was somewhat difficult to see, and the assassin must not have noticed it. Devon pulled out his pistol and aimed directly at the creature. It hissed at him like a wounded, cornered animal. Without emotion, he cocked the weapon and prepared to fire. At this, Meta began to rush forward aggressively. However, its ankles buckled, and it fell to the ground flat on its stomach. The fangs retracted, and the living weapon lay unmoving. Devon knew he should turn it in to the authorities of AEGIS. It was a menace that had killed numerous people. Additionally, they could learn more about Tartar's technology by studying it. However, the fate of vivisection was worse than death, and he did not want to subject any living thing to that. He considered the best course of action would be to put it out of its misery with a shot to the head. Devon walked closer and pointed his gun down at Meta. It weakly raised its head to look at him expressionlessly. In that moment, something struck Devon which he absolutely did not expect. In this murderous creature, he saw a helpless, abused girl. With no strength left to fight, it laid its head down to wait for the end. What if everyone was wrong? What if this monster was actually human deep inside? Devon couldn't kill it after this thought entered its mind. It was most likely a tiny, impossible chance, but Devon was willing to take it. For some inexplicable reason, he felt like he was meant to have mercy. This was a terrible, terrible idea, and would probably get him killed. Oh well. The young man looked up and down the hallway to make sure that no one was watching. Then, he squeezed his eyes shut and threw open the hidden door behind him. The cool California night breeze rushed in. Meta lifted its head once again. It saw the open door and the darkness beckoning. It also saw Devon, empty-handed, gesturing for it to leave. The blue and violet eyes locked together again. The boy was not sure if he could see a soul through these snake-like windows, but there would be no going back. Meta blinked slowly, dragged itself to its feet, and hobbled out the door. As it looked over its shoulder, the last thing it glimpsed was Devon's face as he closed the portal behind it. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 10. 2 days later, Dr. Forkus and Dr. Keto were working in the genetics lab when there was a faint thump from above them. Dr. Keto lifted his head, but Dr. Forkus did not. The sound came again. "Check the door, please, Gilbert," Dr. Forkus ordered without looking up. Dr. Keto nodded and left his experiment. When he opened the door, he let out a shout of delight. Hey, it's Meta! It made it! It's alive! Dr. Forkus had no reaction. Dr. Keto re-entered the room, carrying Meta in his arms. It was bloody, bruised, and exhausted. It had dragged itself for miles through the desert back to Tartarus Genetic Lab, and passed out against the back door. I can't believe it made it back. I thought they killed it for sure. Would have saved us the trouble, Dr. Forkus muttered inaudibly under his breath. It's really injured. Should I bring it back to health? Gilbert, you can do whatever the hell you want with that thing, just as long as you shut up. Dr. Keto proceeded to set up a small cot for Meta, bandaged up its legs, and tended to its other wounds. The man supplied his creation with the specialized intravenous nutritional solution which had been specifically formulated for it. It then sat on a stool by its bedside and watched over it for hours. After so long, Dr. Forkus could take it no longer. He angrily strode over and violently pushed Dr. Keto off his stool. What the hell do you think you're doing? He demanded. Dr. Keto attempted to defend himself. I'm trying to save our creation. Our creation is nothing more than a failed experiment, Dr. Forkus spat. It failed its mission and couldn't even regenerate its injuries like it was designed to. She hadn't gotten her nutrition for days, which must have reduced her healing factor, and you and I both know that last mission was a suicide mission. It doesn't matter. It's just a pile of dirt, animated by chemical reactions. We designed it from scratch, and we can always make something better. Aaron, Dr. Keto pleaded, we're like her fathers. We need to take care of her. Her fathers, Dr. Forkus scoffed indignantly. We're no more its fathers than a carpenter is a chair's father, or a gunsmith is a gun's father. Honestly, you're really starting to piss me off. The irate doctor kicked the stool across the room and stormed away. Dr. Keto's resolution, however, was unaffected. When Dr. Keto awoke the next day, Meta was not in its cot. In fact, it was not anywhere to be found in the lab. He began looking around the building for it, calling its name. Meta! Meta! Where are you? The racket awakened the more hostile doctor. He followed the sound of his obnoxious companion's voice until he found him looking inside a hole in the cell. What are you doing, you retard? He questioned unkindly. Meta's missing. I woke up this morning, and she wasn't where I left her. Before Dr. Forkus could smack some sense into Dr. Keto, he hustled off in search of their creation. The uncooperative man stomped behind. He was so livid that the only thing that prevented him from breaking his fellow scientist's neck was his curiosity about what was going on, and his half-fury, half-amusement at the man's antics. Eventually they found it, wandering aimlessly around the subterranean corridors. Look! Your legs are all healed! See? You just needed your nutrition! Dr. Keto took it by the hand. Now what are you doing out here, Meta? He scolded gently. We were worried about you. The man led it back to the lab, with Dr. Forkus fuming behind him. What's gotten into you? He growled, but the fatherly geneticist didn't seem to hear. When they returned, Dr. Keto went over to his lunch refrigerator and removed an apple. He handed it to Meta. Are you hungry? Do you want an apple? Before Meta could move to take it, Dr. Forkus knocked the fruit out of the other scientist's hand. Are you frickin' nuts? He yelled. You know it doesn't need to eat. We intentionally removed that human weakness, and you yourself helped me create the nutritional serum we give it. Yes, but I thought she looked hungry, and apples are so good. Dr. Forkus said nothing. This man could not be reasoned with. He decided that Meta must be locked up until he decided what to do with it. A creature as powerful as this must not roam freely around. Without heeding any objections from Dr. Keto, the scientist locked his prototype in a cell with a sturdy metal door. The next day, the cell was empty, and Meta was nowhere to be found. Again, after a bit of a search, the two men found it wandering about. As they led it back once again, Dr. Keto speculated. Well, maybe she's hungry, or lonely. She could just want some food or company. Dr. Forkus exploded. He doesn't feel hungry, or lonely, or happy, or sad. It's a monster. We made it specifically to not feel those things. He jabbed a finger at Dr. Keto. You've totally lost it. You started to treat my experiment like a child. Now you're releasing it out of its cell and letting it walk around aimlessly so you can, I don't know what, play the hero or daddy or something. Stop humanizing it! I swear, I'm not letting her out of her cell, the benign scientist defended. She's getting out on her own. I don't know how. Whatever. Dr. Forkus locked Meta in the cell once again. The next morning, the cell was empty for the second time. When they came across Meta, it was wandering about the hallways, clutching the apple that Dr. Keto had given her. See? She was hungry. Meta stood blankly before them. It did not know what to do with the fruit. It had never eaten real food before. Here, you just take a bite out of it, like this. Dr. Keto mimed, taking a bite out of an invisible apple. Good. Now you try. Dr. Forkus snatched the food away and threw it across the hall. Are you out of your mind? It's not hungry. It doesn't feel alone. It's just a tool that's malfunctioning. That's it. Have a heart, Aaron. She just... You know what? Shut up. I can't take this emotionally fatherly shit anymore. There is nothing special about this creature. There are 100 exact copies of it in incubation. I built it from scratch with the DNA of dozens of sources. Stop your ridiculous fantasies of humanistic garbage. Well, if we created her, then it's our responsibility to take care of her. You just... Dr. Forkus could see that there was no sense in reasoning with him any longer. Dr. Keto led Meta back to the lab, and they put it in the cell. For the rest of the day, Dr. Forkus simmered in lethal silence. After night had fallen, the geneticist plotted to himself. This was the last straw. Dr. Keto had fallen into complete insanity. Had the man forgotten splicing their project's genetic code to select the exact traits they wanted? Did he not remember the physical and psychological torture they had performed on it to stifle any form of free will? Could he not see that it was a mindless, bloodthirsty creature? Dr. Keto could no longer be trusted and had to be disposed of. Unseen, Dr. Forkus went to Meta's cell and pressed the button on the console to open it. Okay, you living failure. I have one last mission for you. I want you to kill Dr. Gilbert Keto. He handed Meta a knife. Do it now. Unable to resist a direct order, Meta took the knife and stalked into the room where Dr. Keto was working. It found him leaning over a lab bench, designing a viral transfection plasmid. Hello, Meta, her creator greeted calmly. Have you come to kill me? It continued to walk slowly and unresponsively toward him, knife in hand. I knew Dr. Forkus was planning on killing me soon. I just wasn't sure he'd have you do it. It walked around his desk and directly approached the seat where he was working. Kill me if you must, but know this. He swallowed. I've always thought of you as my daughter, and I always will. Meta froze. It didn't know exactly what he meant, but something in his words reached it. It visualized Devon and remembered him sparing its life. Just then, Dr. Forkus angrily burst into the room. Come on, you worthless piece of shit! I commanded you to kill him, so do it! Kill him! Any semblance of mercy disappeared. Meta's eyes hardened, and it plunged the knife into Dr. Keto's chest. He gasped in pain, and his eyes began to glaze over. It slowly dragged the knife from one side of his body to the other. His warm blood spilled over its hands. As its victim's life left him, he grabbed both of Meta's arms and pulled it close. The scientist looked gravely into its serpentine purple eyes. With his last breath, he murmured, It's not your fault. He forced you to do this. You are so much more than this. Finally, maybe I can finally get something done, Dr. Forkus stated triumphantly as his partner's body collapsed dead to the floor. Now get back to your cell. He pointed back toward where the killer had been kept. The assassin just stood like a statue above the body of its creator, still holding the scarlet-covered knife. It was in an overwhelmed stupor, unable to respond. Still not gonna listen to me, eh? The cruel geneticist retrieved a powerful electric prodding device and pressed it against Meta's back. It recoiled in pain, then fell to its knees. Get back to your cell, he shouted, and kicked the creature while it was down. Using blows and electrical shocks from the device, he forced Meta back to its cell. Rogue experiment goes wrong. Kills scientist. Mourning survivor forced to euthanize weapon. Sounds like a great headline to me. After getting it into the small room, he slammed the heavy door hard. I'll see you in the morning, Dr. Forkus sneered. Meta stood motionless in the darkness and stared at its blood-stained hands. Was it nothing but a failed experiment? A bloodthirsty monstrosity? It had never formed an independent thought in its existence. However, for the first time, one entered its mind. Maybe not. Maybe she was a mindless assassin. Maybe she didn't deserve to live, and there was no point to her existence. But there were two people who thought she might have been more. One was dead. The other... The next day, Dr. Forkus came to Meta's cell with a hypodermic needle in his hand. He flicked the syringe to get any air bubbles out of it. Wouldn't want the beast to die without seeing the full effects of this experimental drug. This would be fun to watch. The scientist pressed the button to open the door, even as he noticed that there were stress marks along the side of the hinges, as though it had been bent with extreme pressure. When the door swung open, the man was dumb-smacked at the contents, or lack thereof. The cell was empty. How the hell? Dr. Forkus smashed the syringe against the ground, shattering it to pieces. His fists were clenched so tightly that his entire body shook. It wasn't Kato. That blasted creature had been escaping on its own the entire time. It dared defy him? It dared to make a fool out of him? Damn you! Damn you all! AEGIS Wars, Chapter 11. The next morning, Devon was training in the unpopular old weight room. The day was uncharacteristically cold and rainy. Even inside, one could almost feel the moisture in the air. Another condemning flaw of this weight room was the manner with which it handled the rain. Devon had set up several buckets to catch drips from the roof, but the walls were damp and moldy. He paid no mind to the adverse conditions. As he worked out his body, he was trying to work out the events of the previous day in his mind. With each change of exercise, he changed his opinion. Maybe I should have turned her in, he thought to himself. Who knows what she'll do? No, I was right. She's a living creature. I can't let any living creature be ripped apart while still alive. I should have just shot her myself. No, she looked so pitiful. She won't cause any more harm. Maybe the act of kindness was all she needed. But what if everyone's right, and she's a monster beyond redemption? I don't know. I don't know anything. With a bang, Jason Hurd slammed the door open and barged in. Hey there, Devon faggot. Haven't seen you in a while. Devon tried to ignore him and continued doing squats without making any acknowledgement of the intruder. Hey, catch! Jason threw his dripping wet coat over Devon's face and back and plopped down on a weight bench across from him. Devon struggled to get the barbell back into its catches, then removed the coat and glared at his rival. Jason continued his mocking harassment. You know, it isn't the same without you being around. My shadow's getting pretty lonely without your companionship. Devon remained calm. His initial fear was that Jason had found out about him letting the assassin escape, and was going to beat him up, or worse. However, this guy was not one to hide his intentions or beat around the bush. If he were here to incriminate Devon, he already would have done it. If Devon could only keep his anger under control. As he attempted to move on to his next exercise, Jason continued the verbal abuse. Yeah, the AEGIS Corps is pretty awesome. It's really intense, and there's a lot of responsibility. It's probably a good thing you didn't get promoted. There's no way a little pussy like you could handle it. Devon refused to take the bait, and picked up a heavy dumbbell for curls. Jason was becoming frustrated at the ineffectiveness of his taunting. It was time for a more physical approach. He stood up and blocked Devon's path of returning from the dumbbell rack. Listen to me when I'm talking to you, freak! He took the weight from Devon's hands and tossed it aside. You know why you're such a failure? It's because you're weak. Jason hit the young man on the side of the head. You're too weak to do what it takes. You're totally worthless. Why don't you just run away? Get out of this whole frickin' place. He shoved Devon backward. Better yet, why don't you just die? He stepped forward and shoved Devon again, harder. Devon stumbled backward over a bench and landed on the ground, next to a rack of weighted plates. The boy struggled to control his temper. Any attempts to fight back would either end in him getting hurt worse or getting in trouble for fighting a superior officer. You're a pathetic little idiot. I really should kill you, but I think I could get some use out of you. Here's the deal. If you do my dirty work for me and help me rise up through the ranks here, then I won't make your life a living hell. Jason extended his hand downward to him. What do you say? It's a deal to die for. There was a pause as Devon pretended to consider the offer. No deal, Howie, Devon cried defiantly. He slid a 45-pound weight plate from the rack onto Jason's foot. The towering legion yelled in pain. Devon pulled himself up with the rack and delivered a sidekick to Jason's gut. He tumbled backward and crashed to the ground. Without even looking to see how Jason would react, Devon dashed out the door into the rain. He did not want to fight, just to avoid being tormented. Was that really too much to ask? The young man was still trying to figure out what his life meant. He did not need this butthole messing with him. Devon retreated for about 5 seconds when he turned and saw that Jason was not giving chase. Maybe in self-defense, he had accidentally hurt him worse than he thought. The boy turned around and headed back to the weight room. On the way back, he felt a bit sorry for his actions. Although Jason totally deserved it, this was not how he wanted to live. Something inside him wouldn't let him act with such violence and disrespect to another person. It would not be fun, but Devon decided to apologize for hurting him, and used the opportunity to try to make peace. Sometimes avoiding conflict meant conceding the other person was stronger. Devon made up his mind to apologize for all of his ambition and prideful conduct, and ask if they could just live without competition or fighting, for good. The rain spattered gently down on him, and he allowed it to wash his anger and bitterness away. When Devon entered the weight room, he could not possibly have been prepared for what awaited him. Meta stood over Jason in a pool of his blood. She had cut his throat with a knife which she had removed from his own belt. Suppressing the horror of the spectacle, Devon immediately sprinted across the room. He cursed himself for not killing her when he had the chance. With a jump over Jason's body, the young man drove his fist into her face. She fell to the floor on her butt, and Devon grabbed a 35-pound weighted plate, holding it up like a shield in preparation for the counterattack. It never came. Meta sat on the floor, staring up at him with her eerie purple eyes. She never changed her facial expression, but Devon could detect something in her face. Was it pain, desperation, or something else? He kneeled down in front of her and looked into her eyes again. The knife in her hand made him quite wary, and he was half expecting this vulnerability to all be a ruse to murder him. Devon slowly reached down and carefully grabbed the blade. She did not react. He lightly pulled the knife away and met with no resistance. The boy tossed it to the floor, where it landed next to Jason's body with a clatter. "What are you doing here?" Devon whispered intensely. A silent stare was the response. "Are you here to kill me, or someone else?" Still no response. Devon took a deep breath and spoke again. "Are you running from Tartarus?" Meta very slowly nodded her head. Devon caught his breath. She could respond. Perhaps there was something inside after all. Devon stood up and put his hands on top of his head. He began half talking to himself, half to the girl sitting on the floor. Oh man, what am I gonna do? I'm in trouble. I could turn her in. No, I can't. She's definitely sentient. Aegis would vivisect her without question. No one deserves that. But you killed Jason. For no reason. I mean, he was a jerk, but you didn't know that. You can't go back to Tartarus, and I don't think you want to. There's no way I can kill her now. She won't even fight back. She must have come to me for help because I spared her last time. A dark thought suddenly entered Devon's head. With Jason out of the way, he would surely be the next one to be promoted to take his place. But as he considered what would happen if he carried out with such an action, he dropped his arms. Whether I turn or not, I'm going to get blamed for murdering Jason. Why? Why'd you have to do that, huh? If I let you go, they'll definitely punish me for killing him. If I kill you or turn you in, they'll be like, very convenient, your longtime rival happens to be the only target of an isolated assassination attack. And I'd still get incriminated. I feel like I'm standing by a river full of crocodiles and a jungle full of tigers with a hunk of raw steak tied to my head. No matter what I do, I'm toast. He turned back to Meta. This is your fault. What am I supposed to do? She had not moved from her position on the floor, simply watching Devon's ranting like a sleepy cat. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to go to my room to get my pistol. Then I'm going to come back here. If you're not here, then you've probably tricked me. This is all some plot by Tartarus or Marcus or someone, and I'm going to blow my own brains out. Save them some time and trouble. If you are still here, then you genuinely want my help, and I'll fight to give you a better future. I don't know where we'll go, but we'll find somewhere safe for both of us. Devon walked to the door. Before exiting, he looked back. It's up to you. When I come back, what you do will determine what happens to both of us. With that, he began heading to the sleeping quarters. The rain had stopped. There were large puddles on the soft ground which served as mirrors to reflect the bright sunlight which had appeared to illuminate the day. During the walk back to his room, his mind was aberrantly calm. It was as though the coin had already been flipped into the air, and he just had to wait until it came down. Only destiny would decide whether he lived or died. Devon drank in the warm rays of the sun without a care, enjoying every minute of it. When the young man reached the complex, he went inside and proceeded directly to his room. He grabbed his pistol and as much ammunition as he could fit into his pockets. Just then, he thought of Salazar's computer and smiled, thinking of the conditions of his hiding spot. Couldn't hurt to bring that along, too. Devon got a travel bag and placed the gun, ammunition, and the computer he removed from its hiding place under the floorboards into it. As he traveled back to the weight room, a sense of dread began to come over him. What was he thinking? What could he possibly do to escape Aegis if the girl was still there? Both Aegis and Tartarus may be chasing them. A bullet to the head was actually sounding better all the time. Upon reaching his destination, he paused with his hand on the doorknob. His stomach was turbulently afflicting him, but it was time to face whatever would happen. The boy pushed open the door, and there was Meta. She was standing up right where he had left her, expectantly waiting for him to return. Devon breathed out all the tension that had built up inside of him, like a whoopee cushion in a way, but without the comedic value. Okay then, life it is. Are you ready to go? The girl took a step toward him. I don't know where we're headed, or how far we'll even make it, but if this is what's in store for us, then I'll fight with every breath in my body. Devon hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. In honesty, he was not at all certain this is what he was meant to fight for. However, it did not seem like he had much choice in the matter at this point. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 12. Where do you run when there is nowhere to go? Devon pondered this question as he and Meta departed Aegis. All Devon brought with him was his jacket, pistol, and several clips of ammunition, and Salazar's laptop. Meta was entirely unburdened. For no particular reason, Devon decided to head north. It was absolutely essential that no one observed them leaving. He was all too familiar with Aegis' policy on deserting. Execution. Although he knew nothing of Tartarus guidelines, he suspected that they were not too much more forgiving. The two fugitives walked for several hours through forests and over streams. Were the conditions different, Devon may have enjoyed the journey. A woodpecker flew in its undulating flight pattern just over his head and gripped the side of a tree to their left. A few steps more, and he saw a squirrel sitting on the ground just off the path. Then, he spotted a small fox beneath a sapling to the right. The boy stopped walking to observe it. He had never seen anything like it before. The cute canine looked back at them curiously for several seconds. Devon got Meta's attention. Look, see? A fox! After deciding that humans warranted no more attention, the small mammal scurried back into the woods. Devon turned to Meta. Did you see that? He asked excitedly. Her blank expression never left him. Did you even look at it? Again, blank peepers. Devon felt immensely awkward. Was it like attempting to train a snake? She showed no sign of any sort of cognitive response to anything he did. Oh well. After walking for several miles, they began to approach the city of Calmingo. Devon knew very well the reaches of Aegis. They had eyes in Calmingo. The city was a vulnerable target of attacks from Tartarus, so the agency had posted numerous undercover agents. He elected to pass through and continue north. However, walking directly through the city would be a terrible idea. The pair was not exactly inconspicuous, and drawing unwanted attention would be undesirable. Aegis would find them for sure. Instead, if they stayed out of the sight of the public, in alleyways and back passages, they just might be able to make it through alive. This was not even mentioning the fact that Meta's frightening appearance would likely cause ordinary civilians to panic. Upon drawing near to the city, Devon led his companion away from the main center of activity. The young man stared into the downtown metropolis as they veered away from the developed area. He would have loved to explore. There was nowhere else on the planet where so much technological development and incredible feats of engineering genius were all smashed together in one place. As the whole city was newly constructed, none of it had decayed into the disrepair that has afflicted every human settlement in history. As of that time, each and every building was currently fulfilling the purpose for which it had been built, and vice versa. The designers hoped that this harmony would remain forever, but it was obvious that would not be the case. Within the few years since its creation, non-ignorable amounts of crime and corruption eroded at the integrity of the infrastructure of the city. Despite this, the utopia was magnificent while it lasted. The city had been built in a once dry, inhospitable area of Southern California, northeast of San Diego by over 100 miles. Pioneering advances in aquatic engineering had used the very scorching sun which had turned the area into desert to create an irrigated paradise. The engineers had created an underground channel which pulled seawater hundreds of miles from the ocean. This conduit was lined with special electrodialysis devices which removed the salt. This mineral was elevated to the surface to be used by hippie California chefs to flavor their bean sprouts and tofu, leaving the remaining water fresh and drinkable. The electrodialysis devices were powered with battery cells charged by enormous arrays of solar panels situated in the blazing sun of the once arid desert. Numerous small municipalities had sprung up in places where the channel had been tapped into, but the crown jewel of the project was the city of Calmingo. Like a sapphire glowing in a vast wilderness, Calmingo was the current endpoint of the channel. As if to boast about the brilliance of its means of conception, a colossal fountain erupted from the underground pipe. The water arced high into the air before depositing into a trough which encircled the south and east edges of the city and terminated into a purification plant for treatment and distribution. This sparkling man-made geyser and river earned Calmingo its nickname, the Azure City. The incredible feat had been called the greatest engineering triumph of the century and the modern aqueduct, among other things. There were plans to extend the subterranean waterway, but for now, it terminated at Calmingo. Devon and Meta passed under the south segment of the canal. Devon wished he could stay and study it, but his urgency to flee, both for his sake and Meta's, prevented him from delaying. The two left the day's bright sunlight and entered the dark shadows in between the buildings and through the alleyways out of sight of the major city center. As they walked through the dim paths, the two observed a number of people in ragged clothes. These homeless kept their heads down and tried to pay no attention to the pedestrians. Those who did look up stared intently at the runaway assassin. Some showed fear, others disgust. A tingle traveled down Devon's spine as he felt their judgmental glances. Although there were individuals of all races and genders in the bottom rung of society, there was still disdain and hatred for those esteemed to be different. Meta was just about as different as they come. She didn't seem to take any notice of these people, thankfully. The last thing they needed was for her to go on some kind of killing spree. The young man was astounded at just how much filth and disrepair could accumulate within the short period of time that the city had existed. Several minutes later, they passed through a residential area. There were apartment complexes with clean, if generic-looking buildings. They seemed to be populated by standard working-class citizens. Devon speculated that there would be a Beverly Hills of sorts on the west side of the city, nearer to where the technology and computer centers were. In the Azure City, techies were the new movie stars. After the apartment complexes was a small inner-city neighborhood. Every house in sight had been constructed within the past 9 years. They showed little sign of wear, and the majority seemed to be occupied by happy families. A number of children played outside in the yards, and the sounds of laughter and dogs barking reached Devon's ears. For an instant, the boy wished he could simply live a normal, peaceful life like that. Finding a wife, raising a family, and living happily ever after would be wonderful, but he knew that was not his destiny. His circumstances had gotten him mixed up with some very serious business, and it would have been impossible to live out his life in peace even before he began helping a killer biological weapon escape her creators and her hunters. Now it was absolutely impossible. At first glance, all the houses appeared picture-perfect, like something out of an '80s Americana movie. After looking for a time, however, it was possible to see that some of them had been abandoned. Neglected, overgrown yards were juxtaposed with the immaculate lawns of some of their neighbors. These buildings and properties were dead silent. There was no way to know the stories of these houses, or the people who had lived there. All that could be determined is that they did not have a happy ending. Past the residential areas, the travelers came to another developed zone with buildings, large and small. They had entered the north side of the city. The two continued into the alleyways again to resume their surreptitious trip across the city. There was bustling commotion on the face of the urban metropolis, but it was fairly quiet in the back streets. Devon and Meta were walking past a side alley when there was a quick rustle and Devon felt a hard steel pressed into his back. "All right, you little piece of shit. Hands up against the wall." A man pushed Devon hard, and he turned as he stumbled, crashing his back into a wall next to a large, open dumpster. The boy looked at his assailant. It was a Caucasian man, fairly tall, wearing a soiled and torn dress shirt and pants. He had a scruffy, unkempt face and hair, and was pointing a pistol at Devon. There were several other men with him, including a burly Hispanic gentleman, a white man in a leather jacket with a crowbar, and a black man with a stocking cap and a gun. "Hand me that bag there, and you and the girl won't get hurt." Meta had not been pushed, but she stood against the wall, several feet down from Devon. The black man was pointing his pistol at her. Ah well, what good would Aegis' secrets be if they were dead? Devon unslugged the bag from his shoulder and prepared to hand it over. "You know, you could have killed us if you wanted. You don't seem like bad guys. Why are you doing stuff like this?" "Shut up. You don't know anything," the apparent leader retorted. "I've had a lot of shitty luck lately. I've been on the streets for 2 years. Life's dealt me a shitty hand, and I'm just trying to even the playing field a little." He reached for the bag. At that moment, the black guy said, "Hey, up against the wall, bitch," and pushed Meta with the nozzle of his pistol just below her collarbone. In one quick motion, she grabbed his wrist and made a large, lightning-fast circular motion which caused him to flip into the air and land on his stomach in the street. Still holding his arm, she stomped hard on his shoulder, breaking his humerus. The man keeping Devon at gunpoint looked in shock at what just happened. Devon took advantage of his attention being drawn away to perform a jumping, spinning moonkick to the man's hand. The gun went flying, and Devon continued the spinning momentum to swing the bag into the target's head, knocking him off his feet. The other two muggers were taken aback at the sudden violence, but then charged in to attack. The guy with the crowbar rushed at Devon, swinging wildly. Devon dodged backward, then grabbed the weapon and twisted the attacker's arm behind his back. He ripped the crowbar away and kicked him in the buttocks. The man crashed into the dumpster, putting his hands in front of him to protect his face. When he turned around, Devon delivered a palm strike to the stomach and performed a finishing jumping chin kick. The man went sprawling backward into the dumpster, and the lid banged shut, closing him inside. At the same time, the muscular Hispanic guy had pinned Meta's arms to her side. She was able to outmatch his strength and throw his hands off. She then did a lightning-fast side kick to the midsection. As he flew backward, she grabbed his right arm with her left and pulled him toward her, awaiting throat strike with her right hand. He was knocked to the ground, dead in a blink. The man who had done the talking retrieved his gun and aimed at Devon's back, 10 feet away. He slowly began to pull the trigger. In a flash, Meta snatched a knife from the back pocket of the black man who was laying on the ground in pain, and used her other arm to slam the shooter into the wall. The gun went off, but the bullet flew harmlessly past its target's head. Meta held the terrified mugger against the wall for a moment. Devon got a sickening feeling as he knew what she was going to do. He shouted, "No, don't!" But she paid no attention. She barreled the knife into his chest. He gurgled and slumped lifeless to the ground. Devon and Meta were both silent for a moment. The black guy dragged himself to his feet and ran away as fast as he could. "You can't just kill people," Devon scolded. "Maybe no one ever told you, but human life is more important than that." Meta picked up the man's gun and held it up to show him. "Yes, I know he tried to kill me, but... Oh yeah, Thanks for saving me, by the way. She dropped the firearm. Still, even when they deserve it, you shouldn't just kill people. We probably all deserve it sometimes, but we need to give everyone a chance. Devon picked up his bag, and they continued walking. They had not encountered any other thugs, ruffians, or insurance salesmen for a while. Hopefully it would stay that way. Calmingo was not so far gone as to have omnipresent gang violence. Sometime later, something occurred to the lad. You know, I don't even know what to call you. Do you have a name? Meta, of course, was silent. Should I call you Marie? Or maybe Olga? He looked at his companion to find her staring threateningly into his eyes. You're right. You don't really look like an Olga. AEGIS Wars, Chapter 13. After walking for what seemed like hours, Devon and Meta were nearing the edge of the city limits. Only a couple more blocks, and they would be through Calmingo. What would come next remained to be seen, but getting out of the city and the eyes of Aegis would definitely be a step in the right direction. Just then, Devon's eyes caught something up ahead. There was a young girl with platinum blonde hair, struggling against a short, overweight man with a receding hairline and a sleeveless white shirt. Another, taller man in a suit looked on. It appeared that they were attempting to force the child into an awaiting van. Devon couldn't hear what they were saying from this distance. He did not have to in order to know that these men were not just taking a stubborn child to the dentist. This was much worse. Without bothering to ask any questions, he sprinted down the alley and did a jumping Superman punch to the unexpecting guy who was manhandling the girl. The chubby fiend was knocked backward and rolled on the ground. The other man grabbed Devon's shoulders. The rescuer couldn't break the grip, so he delivered a quick low kick to his knee, then turned and lifted the man over his shoulder, slamming him to the ground with his seat knuckle. "What's with this city?" Devon asked out loud. "Oh wait, I guess it's just like every other one." He kneeled down to talk to the girl. She was so small and frail it was hard to guess her age, but he suspected it was around 7. She was attempting to scramble away, but Devon held her hand for a moment. "Hey, what's your name?" She whimpered and attempted to break free, so he let her. Immediately, she scurried toward the entrance to a dark alley, but stopped just before entering and turned around.
I'm Angela,"
she called, then disappeared. Angela. Devon slowly stood up, staring after her. He would not forget that name. He was able to save her from a dark fate on this day, but he could not always be there. She had a rough life ahead of her. As Devon began turning to leave, a young man ran toward him from the main street of the city. "Hey, I saw what you just did back there," he said. That was really great." Devon scratched his head self-consciously. Thanks. I just wanted to help." The newcomer patted him on the shoulder. "Well, this city needs more people like you. What's your name?" Devon forgot his situation for a moment. "Oh, I'm Devon Persich." The man's expression suddenly turned dark. Devon Persich. Where do I know that name?" He pulled out a pistol and aimed at Devon's head. He lifted his other hand to his face and began to speak into a wrist-mounted communication device. "This is Gold Duck. I found the fugitive. I'm in the alley at the corner of..." His report was cut off as Meta approached from behind and snapped his neck. The agent crumpled lifelessly to the ground. Devon took off running, and Meta followed. "I told you, you can't just kill people." "Oh, and thanks again." They sprinted northward out of the city. Behind them, they heard vehicles and a huge tumultuous commotion. Aegis had responded to Gold Duck's call. Although they didn't know the exact location, they knew he was stationed in the north part of the city. The vehicles began driving up the highway in pursuit. Devon led Meta down a small paved drive, which split apart from the main road. They ran for several miles on the rarely used road until they came to the edge of a small town. "Good thing they didn't come this way," he exclaimed, "or they would have easily caught us by now." Just then, the sound of the air being beaten with spinning blades reached their ears. Devon looked over his shoulder and saw a helicopter a ways back, but closing fast. Crap. Although it appeared to be a police helicopter, he knew it was an undercover Aegis aircraft. With renewed urgency, the young man pushed his legs as fast as they could go. Meta had no trouble keeping up. The helicopter was closing in quickly, and Devon wasn't sure how much further he could go. Although his body was in very good shape, this much exertion taxed his lungs as well as his legs. Just as he reached the end of his strength, they reached a medium-sized, aging building and darted inside. The helicopter flew past. Devon pressed against the wall within the structure, fearing that his racing heart could be heard over the chopping of the helicopter blades. The droning sound faded into the distance. Good. They hadn't been spotted. Devon plopped down in exhaustion. Maybe we should just run to Canada. Aegis would probably give up the chase if we went to Canada. After resting for a minute, he began surveying his surroundings. There were many shelves filled with old books. There were no lights on, but the glow of the waning sun entering through the faded curtains yielded enough illumination to see. Dust covered everything with a thin blanket, adding to the dull, grayed appearance of the interior. Devon walked over to a light switch and flipped it up. Nothing happened. Didn't think so. There was no power being supplied. The building must have been abandoned for some time, judging by the dust. Whoever had left last must not have cared too much about the books, because they were all left in place, but the door was unlocked. I guess that's a good thing about everyone openly using the internet. No one came and stole these books. The next objective was to find where exactly they were. Devon looked around the lobby for some way to determine the name of the town. Eventually, he cleaned the dust off a brass plaque. Inscribed upon it were the words, Mulford Public Library, opened 1877, Ortontown, California. Well, that answers that. Devon was no human database of geographical information, but he had heard of Ortontown. It was a small settlement in Southern California, which was founded in 1870. Making use of a small natural stream and man-made water towers, the town was able to survive, but could never grow very large. The small town was adversely affected by the development of Calmingo, with many of the residents departing to live and work in the more metropolitan area where the water supply was not an issue. However, a small community was still able to thrive here. It was getting late, and Devon was totally exhausted. He settled himself up against a bookshelf and rested for a moment. Meta stood nearby, staring at him. There were many worries within his mind, preventing him from actually relaxing. Where would they go? Would they be tracked down in the night by Aegis or Tartarus? What the heck was this girl, anyway? You can get some sleep if you want, he suggested to Meta. Her gaze was making him slightly uncomfortable, and he hoped she would take his advice. Despite his fatigue, he could not sleep. There was too much going through his mind, and the unwavering gaze of the assassin didn't help at all. Instead, Devon opened up Salazar's computer. As expected, it was password protected. Salazar was such a nutcase. Who knew what the password could possibly be? Devon tried to think back on what Salazar had said when he forced the computer on him. Air ducts? Devon entered it in. No good. Ooh, I know. Don't trust anyone. He tried it. With caps, without caps, with spaces, without spaces. Still nothing. Maybe just trust. That would be uncharacteristically simple for Salazar, but Devon tried it. Success! How bizarre was that? The files and programs on the computer were arranged in a thoroughly scrambled manner, which did not come as a surprise. It would take ages to sort through it all, but he did not have forever. Since Salazar had not given him a cable, there was no way to charge the laptop. The 6-hour battery life was all that Devon had. There was one window already open, so he clicked on it. To his surprise, there was a close-up image of his companion. This was not security camera photography here. This was almost like a mugshot or profile picture. It was obviously taken by her creators within Tartarus. Devon quickly reasoned Salazar was either a double agent or had hacked Tartarus for information. Based on what Devon knew, there was no way that Salazar was secretly working for Tartarus. Why would someone so fearful work in a profession that would put him in a 24/7 life-threatening situation? He must have stolen information on some of Tartarus' projects somehow. Devon navigated through the file. For the first time, he found the name Meta. That was a shortening of Medusa, which is the mythological monster from which her creators had taken inspiration. The collection contained information about the process used to create her, genetic statistics, and training procedures. He furiously paged through all the data, horrified at what he was finding. What was she? The file also contained information on her attacks on Aegis targets. Salazar must have compiled this folder, because it had security footage from the Aegis outpost in addition to the hacked Tartarus data. The young man continued reading about her for over half an hour, unable to pull away. The horrors of everything Meta had been put through were too cruel to be performed on any living thing. The physical and neural conditioning had been designed to break and destroy any semblance of a free will she may have possessed, and her physical body had been manipulated on a genetic level. Devon closed the lid on the laptop. He had used a sizable chunk of the computer's battery life researching Meta's specifications, but it was worth it. It was important to know exactly who or what one was traveling with. He looked up at the creature, who still stood near him. There was no way to express what he was feeling. He feared her as an assassin, was revolted by her as an unnatural monster, and pitied her as a girl. They had screwed up her genes, beat her body into the image they wanted, and decimated her mind by treating her like some worthless creature. It was a wonder she was able to ever act in a reasonable manner. "So, your name is Meta, huh?" he asked nervously. She nodded. "Meta. Gotcha. Much better than Olga." There was no way Devon could sleep at this point. He kept talking to Meta as a way to alleviate some of the terrifying thoughts that he was having. The boy had no idea if she could comprehend anything he said, but he kept talking anyway. "I'm gonna see if we can find a map or an atlas or something to figure out where we're going to go tomorrow." He stood up and began looking around the library. "Boy, I'm used to using the internet for everything. I have no idea how to find stuff in here." Devon was thoroughly unfamiliar with the library's method of organization. After a brief search around the building, he announced, "Okay, I give up. The Dewey Decimal System is stupid." He plopped back down on the floor and reopened the computer. "I'm gonna see if we have internet." The tired young man opened it up and tried to use the web browser. As expected, there was nothing. Instead, he began to peruse the other files on the hard drive. There was information on a number of Tartarus creations and schemes. The folder names were all based on stories from Greek mythology. Devon clicked on one at random, marked Gigantes. There were images of ugly, fearsome giant men, and information about their specifications and creation. Devon blinked quickly and shook his head. What in the world was that? Rather than dwell on it, he entered the folder Nemean Lion. There was data on a tank-like vehicle, an image of its power in action. Devon frantically opened several more of the folders for a brief moment before moving on to the next. He didn't take the time to look at any of the specifications, only at their existence. Gigantes, Cerberus, Nemean Lion, Cetus, Charmides, Atlas, Typhon, Echidna, Gorgons, Hydra, Chimera, Hades. The horrific images and concepts whirled through his mind. Some were hideous monsters, others were futuristic weapons of destruction. Was this real? Could Tartarus really have developed such devastating things? Then he looked up at Meta. She was still standing serenely, but he knew what she was capable of. She was living proof that Tartarus could, and did, push the limits of scientific possibility, and everything in that computer could very well be in existence at that very moment. Devon forcefully slapped the case shut on the laptop. No wonder Salazar was so neurotic. This stuff was enough to give anyone nightmares. Devon leaned back in exasperation, his head bonking against the bookshelf. "I can't leave. Tartarus is about to unleash hell on Earth. I don't even know why, but I feel like I have to fight. I still have nothing I'm fighting for, and I feel empty. It's just, there's something that drives me on." Devon paused for a moment, then addressed his comrade, still without opening his eyes. "Meta, I want you to run. Find somewhere safe. I'm gonna die here, but you don't have to. If I die fighting, maybe I'll find a meaning in life." Just then, Meta plopped down on the floor in front of him. Devon opened his eyes and found he was staring directly into her expressionless purple peepers. "What are you saying?" he inquired, puzzled at this new behavior. "Are you saying you'll stay and fight?" Meta nodded. "You know that you could get killed, right?" Meta nodded again. A wave of peace came over Devon. If he fought and perished, at least he would not die alone. The tranquility that came allowed Devon to finally relax, and he suddenly felt very tired. It had been an incredibly long day. "Meta, I'm going to sleep now. I have no idea why, but I'm going to trust you. I trust you not to kill me in the night." He laughed a little. "Why, am I stupid or what? Well, there's nothing I can do about that. Good night." She looked back at him with unblinking violet eyes.